Thank you. My biggest fear this summer when I was going away to college wasn't, could I succeed in classes or was I going to pass my math class, although that was a concern. No, my biggest fear was what was my roommate going to be like, right? All I had was a name and an address, Vincent X. Watson from Calumet City. So I spent all summer kind of building a picture of him in my head. He was going to be a squat, kind of burly, muscular guy who never smiled, and I'd have nothing in common with him, and I'd have to share a dorm with him for 9 months. So when I went up to school, had everybody who dropped me off wait in the lobby, and I went upstairs by myself and knocked on the door and took a deep breath and got ready, and I heard this big burly voice say, "Come in." And there he was, just as squat and muscular and everything I had imagined. I shook his hand and I introduced myself, and then I looked up and there was a poster of a comic book character on the wall. And I said, "Oh, you're into comic books?" And he said, "I'm an art major. I'm here to become an comic book artist." And I said, "I'm an English major. I'm here to become a comic writer." And instant, right? All the fears I had had for 3 months were gone. A close friend immediately. So all this is to say is that two things. I've been working towards this goal for a long time, and that this is a medium that can create community, create friends kind of instantly. So hopefully we've just created a new community today, and you don't mind me rambling for a little bit as I talk about the journey that brought me here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking, I hope. Hopefully you guys brought some questions. Maybe some of you are interested in writing or interested in the medium, and maybe I can kind of answer those for you. So hopefully this is engaging and fun for everybody, and thank you all for coming. I appreciate you being here. So I didn't initially get my feet wet in comic books necessarily. It was a journey. I had considered myself a writer pretty much since the time they put a crayon in my hand and I could start to put stuff on paper. But I was the kind of writer that many writers are. Every night I'd be inspired. I would have the brilliant idea that was going to lead me to the great bestseller. And I'd sit down and I'd bang out a couple pages and I'd go to bed and I'd say, like, that's it, right? Like that. And I'd wake up the next morning and I'd have that feeling like I remember last night I wrote something great, and I'd open it again and I'd read it and I'd go, "Oh my God, that's garbage." And I would delete it and then spend half a day going like, what went wrong? And then after dinner, inspiration would strike. Repeat the process for years and years and years and years, right? What finally got me published, pushed me over the edge. Amazon's Kindle had a licensing program with a property that I had grown up with, which was G.I. Joe. You could submit stories, and they would be published, or could be published. So I wasn't sure how long that window of opportunity was going to exist. I just knew that like this was it. This was the time. Like if I was going to do something, it had to happen. So I finally took the advice that I've been giving my rhetoric students for years and years and years, right? Give yourself permission to write I'm going to use the word questionable first draft, okay? Sometimes to keep my students awake in class, I use different adjectives. So I spent 6 months, and every night I'd get to the keyboard, and I'd write. And the rule was I couldn't go back, right? Just write, okay? When I'm done with the draft, I'll read it, and I'll see what needs to be changed. But I need to have something done. And so all those fears continued, right? As I'd be writing, it was like, is this going to be good enough, right? But I stuck to it. I said, I'm going to finish a draft finally, and see what happens. So it took me about 6 months, and then I said, okay, now it's time. What do I have? I expected, like, man, this is gonna be rough. And I went back, and chapter 1, it had been 6 months since I'd written it, so it was kind of fresh. And I said, this is not bad. And so then I continued to read, and there were times when I had to remind myself, like, oh, you're supposed to be kind of critically looking. Like I was enjoying reading it, which I figured was a good sign. So I mean, obviously revisions had to happen, and they did. But I sent it in and crossed my fingers, and about 10 years and 3 months from then, the first novel was published. So it was called G.I. Joe First Salvo. So then the next step is, like, how's it going to be received, right? And I was very gratified to see that people who picked it up really enjoyed it. It was very well reviewed. It sold well. Got a lot of feedback where people said, okay, what's next? And so I did more, right? Again, wasn't sure how long the window would be open, but through that program I published 4 full novels, 3 novellas, which were pretty successful. Maybe a theme that you're going to hear in the next 5, 6, 7 minutes, which is, like I said, all I'm going to talk, and then I kind of open it up to Q&A. Hopefully you have some. Is one opportunity leads to another. When you put yourself out there, no matter what it is, writing, anything, you get your name out there, you do what you love, people hear about it, it leads to the next thing. Okay, so I was in the midst of publishing those. I had people who were reading it, and then suddenly they're contacting me. It's not a comic book, but Moonstone Press is a comic book company. I was contacted by the owner, and he said, we do anthologies of old pulp characters. Would you be interested in submitting a story? I said, great. So I took a little break from the stuff that I had been doing and submitted a story. There it is. So that was the next kind of publication. And all of the G.I. Joe stuff was digital. It was only released via the Amazon app. So I think this was the first book I had that had my name in it that I could put on a bookshelf. Always kind of a nice little threshold. So I published that. Again, I started doing a lot of promotion for the novels and the novellas that I had published. So I started going to conventions and speaking there and networking with other authors. There had been a contest related to those novels, the G.I. Joe novels, where they took kind of the 4 most popular and asked fans to kind of vote on a new character that they would produce as an action figure. So I won that, and they produced an action figure based on a character that I created for the novel, which was really fun. At the time, there was a Toys R Us right down the street, so I would stop there after work on the way home, and they constantly had to kick me out because I was grabbing people in aisles and like, Bill, come on, go away. But I met some other authors around that time. One was by the name of Jim Beard. He was doing a collection of essays, and he asked me to kind of contribute an essay. He was writing a book called The Joy of Joe. So I wrote an essay for that, and I co-edited that. And I don't want to take credit where it's not due. He was kind of the main driving force, but he asked me to kind of edit a third of those. I love Jim Beard to death. He has a lot of great works on Amazon. Check him out. But he made some really questionable decisions, I think, in terms of cover. My face is not one that I think will ever sell a book, but he did choose to kind of put me there on the cover. So that gave me some nonfiction credits under my belt and some editing credits, which was nice. Around that time, the main convention was called JoeCon. So we had just published that one, and we're kind of promoting that one. And I thought to do kind of a companion piece that I called The Joy of JoeCon. So this one I did edit, and I kind of put together. So I didn't write anything for that, but I compiled it, met all the people, and kind of designed everything there. I made a better choice, I think. My wife is much more apt to kind of sell books than I am, so I chose to put her on the cover instead. So that was a lot of fun. And again, it's all about networking and meeting different people and kind of getting stuff out there, one opportunity leads to another, leads to another. So it was at a convention that I approached another toy maker, company called Marauder Task Force. So I pitched a novel to them. They produced action figures that were more modular. You don't buy a character, this guy's name is Jim or something. You put together a different head and a different body and a different thing. And my belief in writing is that characterization sells, right? What I tell my 103 students all the time is that if you get an audience invested in a character, they will read. I've read a lot of terrible, terrible written prose about characters that I love. And I've read fantastic books whose characters just didn't speak to me. It just didn't matter how wonderfully written it was, it didn't compel me. So what I suggested was, I want to create some characters for you and get people attached to them, and that will drive sales. So I wrote that novel for them. It was published through their website. We released at a different convention, I think 25 hardcover copies, kind of a exclusive, and then a number of paperbacks. So I was able to do that. I'm getting to the comic books, I promise. Okay. It was actually at that launch party at a convention in Savannah that I made the connection that led to me writing comic books. Again, another independent toy maker. I had never met him before, but through all of this other promotion and all these other things that I had done, I had met a lot of Hasbro employees. And he was an ex-Hasbro employee, so we had mutual friends. And he was there kind of developing his line and kind of promoting it, so I approached him and same thing. I said, hey, Bobby, characterization sells toys. Characterization sells books. Characterization sells. You've got these figures. They look great. Who are they? Let me kind of help you sell them. And he said, okay, give me a pitch. Write me a short little story about this one character. Okay. So I did, right? Submitted a script. This was more of a short story than long form. It was, I think, 12 pages. And he said, this is great. This is exactly what I need. So he printed this off for the next convention he went to and started using it as promotional material. And again, much to my... I didn't sleep a lot last night. I went to a concert, so sometimes words just freeze in my head. Forgive me. I was very happy to see that people responded to it. And he came back and he said, oh, okay, let's do a series. Let's do more. So I did. I just brought a few issues here. I think in total there were 9 issues. He did one of them because it was a character he really cared deeply about. But I did eight for him. That's one of my favorites there. And he had kind of a background in comics, so he was able to kind of serve as an editor at times, which was great. He taught me some really important things that I've been trying to pass on to my graphic novel class, which I'm teaching for the first time. Yeah, everybody. Oh, thank you so much. So eventually those were all compiled into kind of a trade paperback. Again, nine of them in here, but one of them he did, and then the others I did. And again, it's just wonderful to have stuff that's sitting on your shelf that's got your name on the spine, or you know that you did. Eventually, I had more stories than he had pages or artists. So I went back to him and I said, "Hey, we need another 300-400 pages." So that was one of the kind of the last things that I published for him. Is a long-form novel. Same characters, same kind of scenario, but just able to kind of get a little more into the weeds with kind of characterization and storytelling, which has been really gratifying. So that kind of catches you up. Last thing I did, and I knew the date of my first publication because the anniversary came around. It was around July 4th, 10 years ago. And the Kindle stuff that I had done for G.I. Joe has been out of print. When I was told when that happened, I have the rights to the stories, I don't have rights to the intellectual property. So for years and years and years, people have been saying like, hey Bill, how can I get this book? How can I get this book? I said, well, you really can't. So people said, you got to do something. You got to get this back out. So eventually what I did is right around the 10-year anniversary, this came out about July 4th this year, I republished it under a different name. Okay, so instead of G.I. Joe First Salvo, it's now DC Colt First Salvo. So that's available on Amazon, and yeah, many of these things are available if you're looking for something good to read this December. Couldn't have done any of this without two things. Well, three things. Support of my family, okay, especially in those early years. Come home, eat dinner, grade papers, spend some time with the kids, and then I'm out for 3 hours because I'm going to be sitting in front of a keyboard. So I appreciate the support I got there. But networking was very important. It's not something that comes naturally to me. But like I said, get yourself out there, expose yourself. People find you, people talk to you, and it leads to great things. And then if you're thinking about writing or you have any interest in writing, give yourself permission to do it poorly at first. Okay? Get something on paper. You can't edit a blank sheet of paper. People will tell you what doesn't work. And that's okay. You go back and you revise it and you make it work. But I never would have got there if I hadn't finally found the courage to say, I need to finish something, get it done, and then go back and see what I've got. Okay? So that's a little bit about my journey and kind of what brings me here today. Like I said, I don't want to just bore you with my voice for 50 minutes, hoping you guys have some questions about the process or writing or anything I've done or getting into the field or anything that may interest you. Anybody? Yeah?
I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So my family are very enthusiastic Transformer fans, and we have recently heard that Transformers may be having a movie with G.I. Joe as kind of a extra plot line. So can you talk a little bit about how those collaborations come about, and if you think you could maybe submit some storylines in that direction?
Yeah, I can speak to some of that, yes. Yeah, there was the last Transformers movie. They kind of teased something like that at the very end. The way those collaborations come about is because they're both owned by the same company who wants to promote both of those properties and sell toys. Transformers is hugely successful for Hasbro. It's one of their main boy toy lines. G.I. Joe's kind of seeing a resurgence, but not as successful. They really want it to be successful because it's one of the few properties they own outright. They share Transformers, I think, with Takara in Japan. A lot of their other properties, Marvel, Star Wars, they had Power Rangers for a while, Ghostbusters, all of those they pay licensing fees for. So yes, they really want to make G.I. Joe as lucrative as Transformers. Has anybody seen any of the G.I. Joe films? Yeah, not so great.
I like the last one.
The Snake Eyes one?
I like that one.
Okay, yeah. I firmly believe, I've already said this, the characterization is always the key, right? You have to make your characters people that you can fall in love with so that I'll go back to the theater or I'll buy another book. So I think that's what they need to work on a little bit with their filmmaking enterprise. In terms of graphic novels and comic books, for the last several years, I believe it was IDW had the licensing rights for both G.I. Joe and Transformers. That lapsed maybe 2 years ago, and it was picked up by Robert Kirkman's label. I think he publishes through Image. He's the guy who did The Walking Dead. So he picked it up, and what they've been doing in the comics under his guidance is kind of, like you said, a shared universe. For the first time in many, many years, I think they just slipped, but the Transformers book was in the top 5 or 10 in the sales for the month, and I think it outsold every DC book. Yeah, which is just kind of unheard of. Like Marvel and DC kind of run the roost, right? So yeah, I think it just slipped out of the top 5 or 10, whichever one it was, but it was selling rather well. So yeah, we are kind of seeing both of those kind of get some more attention. Now, cornering Robert Kirkman and pitching to him, I have ideas, definitely. I'm not there at my networking yet. So, okay, yeah, Dante.
Through the wonderful magical world of Disney, you now own Star Wars, and you being a fan of that, do you think you would have some stories, that you would like to write, for Star Wars with the way Disney's going?
It almost sounds like a loaded question. Like with the way Disney's going is an interesting qualifier.
I'm just saying, buying up every IP. That's all I'm saying.
If given the chance, I would jump at a chance to write a Star Wars novel or short story or comic or whatever they would let me get my hands on. I have the Del Rey editor's card in my wallet. So I've met him and spoken to him. He refuses to respond to my emails or calls at this point. Typically, Disney's approach to that is they don't accept pitches. They go out and come to you and say, you're an author that we think would fit us. So yes, absolutely, that would be a dream project for me. And I have plenty of stories roaming around in my head that, if they need it. Yeah. If they need an elevator pitch, I've got one. If they don't like that one, I've got another one. We'll stop the elevator and keep going until we get one. But yeah, I'd love that opportunity.
So why did you choose to write G.I. Joe? Did you play with G.I. Joe dolls as a kid, or were you just interested in it?
I did, yeah. I had a vast collection. Yeah, I mean, you can tell just by kind of the genre that I've gravitated towards that action figures were kind of a big part of not only my childhood but my life. So yeah, like coming up with stories wasn't tough because I'd spent a good part of my childhood kind of with friends, kind of sitting around creating stories. My approach, it's a universe where there's a spectrum. It can be very kind of fantastic and otherworldly. We can combine with talking cars, for example. I was more kind of military grounded, so a lot of the stuff I did kind of took a more mature approach that I think other people who were my age and had grown up with the property kind of appreciated because it had never really been done before. I think some people who kind of picked it up expecting what we would have had in like Saturday morning cartoons were kind of like, oh, this is kind of very different and a little more mature. Okay. Did you?
Can you talk specifically about the comic book writing process, because it's kind of a team effort and it's very visual, so how does that differ?
Yes, we've been talking about that. Quick pitch. The Triton College has piloted a graphic novel course for the first time this semester.
When is this?
Meets Monday nights from 6 to 9. It will be offered again next semester, same time.
Oh, okay. So it's offered for spring?
Yeah.
And it's not filled?
No, I think registration just opened.
Oh, okay. 6 to 9 on Monday nights?
Monday nights, yeah. FOMO is a great seller. Yeah, it's co-taught between me. I handle the writing duties, and then Stephanie Lupo, Professor Lupo, does the art.
Can we take it again?
You may absolutely take it again. I don't want to oversell it, but are we having the greatest time?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I am not overselling this. What they're producing is miles above even our highest expectations. So we're just getting the final art this week, and we'll have some sort of presentation at the end of the semester. Keep an eye out for that, because what they're doing is just, like I said, miles above everyone's highest expectations.
What is the prerequisite?
There is a prerequisite for it that doesn't matter. It's, and I'm not going to forget, I'll get back to your question.
Sorry.
It's the code is MCM 296, which is our special topics course. So there is a prerequisite attached to it just by virtue of it being that code. So whatever it is, you don't need.
MCO what?
MCM 296.
296.
Yeah.
MCM.
So speak to me or Professor Lupu, I'm sorry, and we'll get that waived. We'll make sure that if you're interested, we'll get you into it, and we're gonna have a great time again. You had asked about process. I have been told by other people that I am a detailed visual writer, that when they read chapters they can understand, they have a mental image in their head. I really think that's a weakness of mine. So working in this medium has been so gratifying, because I don't have to describe it in beautiful words for an audience. I just have to communicate it to an artist. And if I can just stop and say like I have to be very fluent, as you can tell. Sometimes I'm not. I can just say bookcase there, person here, him facing this way. And so what's fantastic is I write the script, I give it to an artist. In some cases, I've had no contact with the artist before. It's been sent out to the art department. But when I get back those pages, and I furiously kind of, it's often as if they cracked my head open and just kind of poured it on the page. And that does that detailed lifting for me. I can tell the story, I can work on the characterization, I can worry about the plot, and they're producing what I'm imagining in my head, sometimes better than I was imagining it in my head. So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
So your roommate, so two questions. Was he able to break into the field the way he wanted, and were the two of you able to collaborate?
We really should have. You would have thought that we would have done a little more of that. He did not. He was a sophomore. That was my freshman year. So he graduated a year before I did. And then the rumors around campus were that he had moved to Oregon or something and become a lumberjack. I got that specifically from his next roommate. I ran into my senior year, and I was like, "Oh, have you spoken to Vince?" And he said, "Yeah, he left Calumet City and moved to Oregon and became a lumberjack." And I thought, "Oh, that's..." And back then we didn't have email or anything, so I thought I had kind of lost him. And then the night before my wedding, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, and I said, it's a shame that I lost Vince, because I would have loved to invite him, but he's in Oregon being a lumberjack. And our friend said, "No, he's not. I saw him 3 weeks ago. He's still in Calumet City." So as far as I know, he never broke into the field. I don't know if he's still in Calumet City to the day. I still have to track him down. But he was wonderful in making me feel comfortable in college and showing me the ropes. And and we would talk comics, but a lot of our conversations were just kind of social things and getting through college. And he was a great mentor to me that first year. So, go ahead, and then I guess
you were writing scripts. So can you talk a little bit about, could a person write a play and it be converted into a comic?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, comic writing is basically script writing. So one thing I tried to do is make sure that every page is a different word page, and then I'll kind of, different authors do it different ways. Some are very prescriptive. Take somebody like Neil Gaiman, and his scripts are very detailed, where he gives the artist very little control. He'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nine panels. This one is exactly here. This is exactly what's going on. Some other writers, especially if they trust their artist, are a little more kind of free. There's going to be 4 panels on this page. Set them up however you will. And I've kind of, depending on who I'm working with, I've approached those differently. You mentioned the collaborative process. There's a level of trust, right? Like, you tend to get possessive of your stories. And so if you know somebody that you can trust, and you know that they're going to do you justice, you say, like, well, this is what I'm thinking, do it. I think some other people like Neil Gaiman are very kind of like, this is exactly what I want, and you're just a hired pencil.
So how did you find your illustrators, and were you successful with the first one right off, or have you gone through a number of people, or how did that?
I've worked with 3 or 4. It wasn't my responsibility to find them. The person who was publishing them and working as the editor did that. I think that there are some that were better than others. This first issue, I don't think was hand-drawn. I think it was more like computer-generated. It has a very kind of different feel than what you would get out of kind of more hand-drawn stuff. And I think Bobby, who owns the company and kind of hired this, also said, like, well, this is kind of not the style we want throughout. So let me see if I have one from, I don't remember. There's 2 or 3 others. I don't know if this was Andrews or not. One of them was done by Nedrow Diaz, but you can see this is kind of more traditional hand-drawn kind of stuff. One of them was Nedrow Diaz, who's gone on now to work for Marvel. So that networking thing. And he was great to work with. That was during COVID, and I think he's from Brazil, somewhere in South America, I believe. But he sent me a message one day right before class, and he said, I need to talk to you. I'm looking over the script. And before he said anything else, I wrote back, and I was like, it's page 8, isn't it? And he said, yeah. So, I knew as I was writing that page that it might be hard to kind of convey what I was thinking. But we had an open line of communication, and he said, like, just clarify a little bit. Like, this is how I'm envisioning it. Will this work for you? And I said, yeah, that's perfect. So being able to communicate with the artist and clarify things or share ideas, that's what makes the medium unique. It's a collaboration of many different people. Right?
A dream character that you would like to write for Marvel or DC?
Marvel or DC? For Marvel, it would be Wolverine. He's my favorite Marvel character. For DC, probably Batman, which I suppose is kind of a cliche answer, but just kind of a rich, flawed, complex character that you can kind of play with. I'm just going to do ladies first. Just
What's on your pull list right now, and who would you like to work with?
my pull list.
Choice.
My comic pull list. I don't think you're going to like this answer. I canceled my pull list recently. My wife is celebrating. My problem was, my resolution initially was like, every Wednesday I'm going to stop on the way and pick them up. I would forget to do that because I'd have other things. I'd have papers to grade and responsibilities. So that would go a few weeks, and then it's like if it's every week, it's like, oh, I'm going to spend $16 on the way home, no big deal. When it goes a couple months, then it's like, I owe you how much?
What's the bonus?
So that every week when comics are released, you can just set it up so they, you say like, these are the titles I want. Just set them aside for me. And yeah, if you go every week, it's not that much. But when you forget for a while, then it's suddenly an expense. And then it's like, well, I'm not going to go this week because I don't get paid till next week. So yeah, I've kind of. Second question: who's dream to work with?
Yeah.
I think, and this is not a big splashy name necessarily or answer, but I've made friends with Robert Atkins. He's done some work for Marvel. He did some work for IDW. He did a cover for one of the books. Actually, I think this is his cover. And we've gone out socially and we've talked about the industry. He's provided me some materials that I've been using in the class. Was really great. He provided a number of scripts that he had worked with, which was fantastic, to be able to show our students, but it actually set up one of our assignments when we were doing layouts, thumbnail sketches. I was able to give them a page from a published script and ask them each to kind of thumbnail it. It was a really fun class, I thought, where we got to go in and see how everybody kind of approached it differently. What their vision was and how they took those panels and kind of laid them out. So it'd be fun to work with him just because I respect him and I like him as a person. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So Bill, I remember watching the G.I. Joe as a kid, and at the end there was always, knowing is after battle when you get the moral or some practical advice. And then you also mentioned that you like these morally complex characters, and so I was going to ask you if there are morally complex characters in your G.I. Joe edition.
Yeah, and like I said, I tried to approach it from a really grounded, realistic perspective. I think it would be morally irresponsible to write about war and not show the effects of war. So I didn't end the book with kind of a like, this is what you should have learned from this book. But I did deal with the consequences of violence in the novel, and then I had characters kind of, especially in the sequel, kind of coping with those things. So yeah, there's some deep moral issues that I was kind of wrestling with in the book, and tried to present that from different ways and kind of create realistic characters and how they would respond to those situations. Go ahead.
So I was wondering if you could speak to we mentioned like G.I. Joe and Batman, Wolverine, the longevity of what you see in certain comic book characters. So I probably came up in a similar era as you, and I remember in like the mid-90s, there was what I saw as a little bit of a breakthrough of these characters I'd never seen before with Dark Horse and Image Comics, like Spawn would be a perfect example of that. But there are so many characters that just stick around forever, right? Like Batman came out, in like the 30s, Superman in the 20s. Like,
yeah.
What's the staying power for those characters, do you believe? And the different iterations that happen, like we have new generations. We have a Spider-Man movie every 6 months, right? We have different Batman series coming out, every decade. Like, what do you attribute to the staying power and longevity of certain characters in the comic book?
It's a real interesting medium, and if I don't answer the question, if I don't get where you're trying to go, redirect me. It's a real interesting medium, right? Because typically when you're writing characters, you're writing for development and growth, right? You take a character, often a flawed character, put them through all sorts of things, and hopefully see them kind of grow and mature, or change, somehow become dynamic by the end of the story. Comic books try not to do that because you're going to have Batman another 80 years from now. So it's a difficult writing thing because you want your characters to grow and change, but also if I skip 5 years of Batman, I want to be able to pick him up and recognize him as the character that. So that's a real interesting thing, right? DC's tried to kind of fix every kind of 20 years they have some sort of crisis and kind of like hit the reset button. But even so, like Batman is still Batman is still Batman. I think the longevity comes from the fact that people get invested in these characters that they love. You know, I've been reading about Spider-Man for 30 years, so if you hand me a Spider-Man comic, I'll be like, oh, what's he up to nowadays? But also that, and this kind of maybe contradicts what I was just saying, that they work very well as archetypes. And I think that's part of the power of like movies now, is like we can create a Batman movie and it's still Batman, but it's different than the one we made 5 years ago. I can recognize all those archetypes. I can recognize him as this character that I love, but it's a different spin. Nolan's films were kind of much more kind of detective, kind of grounded stuff than whatever Joel Schumacher was doing when we were kids. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Brief aside, I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but I think they kind of ruined Spider-Man by not doing that. They kind of changed his character completely, and I think that probably distanced a lot of characters, or a lot of readers, rather. Okay.
With the class that you have now, are you accepting or are you welcoming of like guest speakers? That's one question.
Yeah. Yeah.
And number two, since you talked about networking and all of that, are you open to like speak on different platforms like podcast shows, things of that nature?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. We're gonna talk after class or after. Yeah. We're in the process of planning. We need to have, because again, they're producing something marvelous. So we have to figure out at the very end of the semester how we're going to share that with as many people as possible and bring in people outside of Triton community who may look at it and tell them how proud we are of what they're doing. So yeah, absolutely. But yeah, go ahead.
Your favorite comic book writer and your favorite comic book artist?
Favorite comic book writer and favorite comic book artist. Favorite is really tough, right? Can I say that maybe one of the most influential would be Larry Hama, who wrote the early G.I. Joe comics. I think the first comic I ever owned was G.I. Joe #7, and I still have it looks like it's been through the washing machine 5 times. It's scraps, but I got him to sign it, and I put it in something like this so that at least as it disintegrates, it'll still be in the same place. But that was kind of an eye-opening experience for me because I had grown up on the cartoon, which was kind of goofy, and there was always a little moral at the end. And then that was kind of far more serious and gritty than my young mind was expecting to find there. So I learned a lot about storytelling because I didn't really read a lot of comic books other than that when I was young, other than his. But then I got introduced to, for example, like Frank Miller. It's right from that to like The Dark Knight Returns or The Killing Joke. It was Alan Moore. I mentioned Neil Gaiman. I know I probably shouldn't because I think he's embroiled in kind of a scandal right now. But Sandman is just a brilliant work of art. And of course, Watchmen, Alan Moore's Watchmen, is just kind of a seminal piece in the field. So a lot of those showed that the medium could be far more than just biff pow, and that kind of shaped how I approached the storytelling. There's some really great things about the medium, right? We talked about the collaboration aspect. It's character driven, which you've already noticed is kind of important to me. It's serialized. I love the world building possibilities in any of those things. I've recently started reading Saga recently. I think that's Brian Vaughan. It's another great series, or at least started off as a pretty good series. So I mean, yeah, there's some fantastic people out there doing some great work. All right. Okay. Yeah.
Are you the sort of writer that sometimes just gets really amazing ideas at the worst time, like you're driving or you're like literally just like shopping or something, just in a situation where you can't go down and write, and it's not going to be a while until you can go down and write?
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
They're like, excuse me a second, and I
While you drive?
text myself.
That's a good idea. That happens to me way too often, so I'm just kind of curious how writers might deal with that.
What I will do is I'll try to get down as many kind of outline notes, and then the honest answer is I will just obsess over them, like while I'm shopping or while I'm driving or while I'm doing whatever. The worst is when they happen like right as you're dozing off to sleep.
Yes.
Right. That's part of my process. Is what I'll do is I'll write a scene, and I don't know how to say that. I'm afraid this doesn't come off as arrogant, so forgive me if it does. Usually when I write, the story comes, like once I have the kernel of the story, it just starts to roll in my head. The challenge for me is then like getting that onto page in a way that it'll make sense to other people. So often what I'll do is I'll write a page or write a scene or write whatever, and I'll go to bed, and then I'll lay down, and it's like a movie. Like the next scene just suddenly is going through my head as I'm falling asleep, and then yeah, it's like this is really good stuff. Like, yeah, I hope it's there when I wake up in the morning. But you know, even sentences or paragraphs, there's been times where I've been drifting off to sleep, and I'm like, no, I gotta get that down before, you know, I lose it. So you know, I keep my phone in the bathroom, and I'll go in there and I'll text just write myself a paragraph and text it to myself or something so that I don't lose it. But yeah, if I'm driving, it'll just replay in my head over and over and over again until I get somewhere where I can kind of commit it to something. Okay. I think I saw her first, and then I'll get you. Yep.
Oh, so personal question. So how has your mental state or possible illnesses impacted your writing?
How my mental state?
Yeah. Like you know, ill.
So I definitely suffer from OCD. I think, yeah. You could tell, huh? So I definitely think that affects my writing process, and that may be one of the things that makes it hard, because remember those early days when I would just write and then scrap, right? Because I think there was a tendency I want to make it perfect, right? I want to make everything perfect. And so I had to kind of learn to kind of put that aside and say, like, you can go back and make things perfect. And truly, in writing, nothing's ever going to be perfect, right? So that was a struggle. I think that held me back for a number of years. I had to kind of learn to let go for a little bit. And I don't know if this is answering your question, but maybe is of interest to some people. I'm an English professor. I have multiple degrees. I know the rules of grammar. Like, if you hand me a student's paper, I will point out every little flaw. If you ask me to read my own chapter and I've misspelled the most basic word in the world, I will read that sentence 12 times and not realize that I don't know how to spell the. Because my mind it knows what's supposed to be there. And so when I'm reading, I've had people like say, Bill, read this out loud to me. And I've read it out loud, and they said, now read what's on the page. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm still working on that one, and that's why I bribe people to edit for me after I've edited 4 times myself. So I don't. That's the next kind of mental handicap I need to learn to read my own work. Okay.
It seems that AI would lend itself well to the genre. Has that really taken off?
I think it's starting to take off in my classroom more than I'd like it to. Yeah. I haven't heard any examples of people submitting scripts that are AI generated, but I think it could very well happen. I assume that most people who are going into the genre care about the genre and aren't just looking for a paycheck. It's hard to break in the first place. But it wouldn't surprise me if people are like, I need an idea for this next issue, and using that as a template or a starting point. So yeah, we'll see what happens as it gets more and more complex and more difficult to detect. Mm-hmm.
Other than the written portion, would you be okay with the art being from artificial intelligence corresponding?
That's a big issue. And I know a lot of artists are very kind of concerned that A, they're being supplanted or replaced, and B, that their work that they have put out there is feeding into these algorithms and kind of being used. I prefer the traditional collaborative experience of producing a comic book. And it's more than just artists and writers too. You got the letterers, and you got the inkers, and you got the colorists. I'm sure companies would love to just right, give me this, and there's the script, and there's the art, and there's everything. It would hurt me if creatives lost creative control over that type of process.
You mentioned you have kids at home. I'm not sure how old they are. Have they read any? Have they read it? Okay. Have they read what you have done, and do they have sort of an appreciation for it?
No.
I know their age, and so.
No, I don't. I for the most part, no. They've shown very very little interest. But what's gratifying to me, and especially, like I said, I had reprinted this. Everybody who bought it digitally 10 years ago has a copy, but otherwise it didn't exist. I spent a lot of time debating about whether I was going to do this, because it wasn't the original story that I had set out to tell. I had to make compromises with names and whatnot. Eventually, one of the things that pushed me over the edge, somebody said to me, Bill, when you're gone, your kids are probably going to have this on their bookshelf. So my youngest just turned 18, the twins. They've shown no interest, but I'm hoping maybe years from now, that when I'm not around, that they'll have a library here that they can kind of go back and kind of hopefully teach them some good lessons, and yeah, communicate with them and justify the hours I spent typing and not playing with them. I mostly did it when they went to bed. So. Right. And that being said, they have been extremely supportive. There's my daughter there and her roommate. Thank you for coming. Right. Right. All right. Okay.
You started out writing novels, lots of words. When you do a comic book, is the process like writing a novel and just paring it down, or is the process totally different?
That's a good question. It's different because you do have to kind of distill, but at the same time you have the imagery to help you fill in a little more of that. So yeah, there's definitely a trade-off, and that's what led me then. I had done the comics, and then I was like, I need more space. I need more, because I do like to kind of get more complex and delve into things. But the advantage of this medium is I don't have to write 3 pages of description of scenery, right? Or I don't have to, I can use one panel that just kind of works as an establishing shot and lets people know the context right away. We were talking in a class the other day about characterization and the importance of establishing a character right away. Because when I was working with my editor, he said, you know, space is the key. You've got 22 pages, right? So in a novel, I can spend 3 chapters kind of establishing, you know, who a character is and you know, what he represents and those types of things. I'm going to introduce my protagonist on page 2, and I'm going to get into Act 2 then, you know, 2 or 3 pages later. So I've got to like really kind of establish exactly who this person is and why you care about him or her immediately. So yeah, there's very different kind of approaches to the storytelling. In class, to demonstrate this, does you remember the show Cheers? I showed, I think it's the first 15 seconds that Coach is on screen, right? He's behind the bar, the phone rings, he picks it up, he says, hold on a second, is there an Ernie Pantuzo here? And Sam says, that's you, Coach. And he says, speaking. And I said, 10 seconds, you know everything you need to know about that character, right? Like you've established exactly who he is and what he represents and how he's going to function. And I think with comics it's the same way. You don't have a whole lot of time. You've got to kind of, this is your character, this is why you care about him, because in 3 pages he's going to be in trouble. Okay. All right. Okay. She's going to take over. I'm just going to say one more. Can I say one more thing?
Go ahead.
Okay. 2 more things. Again, thank you all for coming. I truly appreciate it. I appreciate all the support and you being here. I was very honored that they invited me. I just wanted to point out that I'm not the only person in the English department who's done wonderful things. And I saw some of these down in your case downstairs. But Paul Martinez is our wonderful poet. He's published some excellent stuff. Dr. Dragon recently published a children's book. She's sitting right there. She can tell you all about it.
That's who she is when you be putting her name over.
Yeah, the one I give credit every time when I use one of her
Yes.
PowerPoints. There she is. So yeah, we have some wonderfully talented people on campus, and I've learned from their examples. And yeah, thank you for making me the one. But yeah, we've got some great people on campus who are doing some great things. So thank you all for being here.